B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. Thanks for clicking and listening. It's Friday, March 1st, 2019. Been a wild week. And I've got news and comment for you. After a 10-year legal battle waged by the fine folks at the Center for Constitutional Rights, a federal judge has finally set a trial date and dismissed all of the motions to delay or dismiss the charges against CACI Premier Technology. This was the contractor engaged by the Bush administration to manage the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. And when Dick Cheney and his gang decided that they needed to Gitmoize the operation in Iraq, they imported some goons from Guantanamo. I recall a general named Jeffrey Miller. And the khaki guards were mercenaries. And they followed orders. And they tortured people. And finally, there may be some justice in this matter, as a trial has been set for Northern Virginia. The trial date is April 23rd. And it will be fascinating to see if the smokescreens of state secrets, national security interests, and the like will be allowed to prevent justice in this case. And over at Shadowproof, Kevin Gostola, he's the guy who gave us live reports from the then Bradley Manning court-martial. And he has been on the case related to torture issues for many years now. And he cites the case of Salah El-Ajali, who was a former reporter for Al Jazeera. And Al-Jaili, I guess is the correct way to pronounce it, was detained at Abu Ghraib for 6 weeks. He was forced to strip naked when he arrived. They put a bag on his head, and they shouted at him to confess. The first night, he was put in an orange jumpsuit, handcuffed to a pole, with a bag over his head. He says he vomited a black substance. A woman came in during the night, touched him, pulled at his hair. He was ordered to clean up the vomit with his jumpsuit, then taken to a cell. Then he complained that he was cold, had nothing to wear. And a guard gave him some ladies' underwear. He said he was interrogated 10 times, 2 or 3 times a day, each time stripped naked, had a bag placed over his head, taken to an interrogation room. And during the interrogations, he was often handcuffed to a pipe, and then beaten, punched, kicked, slapped on the head. Sometimes they doused him with hot water, hot tea, or cold water. Now, some of the cases that involved U.S. military personnel, like those grisly photos that surfaced, showing how her name was Lindy England, remember? She was trying to impress her boyfriend, and she put a leash on a guy's neck and posed next to him smoking a cigarette. Others were subjected to fake electrocutions as electric wires were attached to their body parts. And these are really ugly chapters in American history. And what's fascinating to me is that this can be used for fodder for Hollywood entertainment. We have lots of movies and TV dramas and Netflix series that are based on exploiting torture and that openly depict the very kinds of activities that the United States authorized under the Bush administration. And yet, when it comes to showing this kind of evidence in court, oh, we get all squeamish and, oh, man, you can't do that. It's bad for our image. Well, somebody should have thought about that when we started to engage in torture. And to my knowledge, there are 0 instances of a terror plot that was busted up or a single American life that was saved because we tortured somebody and they spilled their guts. And this barbaric embrace of torture, and the extraordinary lengths that they went to prove that it works, including the CIA's involvement in the award-winning film Zero Dark 30. It is such a low point in my lifetime and in American history. And today I'm releasing to my subscribers a powerful new interview with Dr. Jeff Kay. Jeff worked as a psychologist for many years. He's now retired from that profession, and he works as a journalist. He does a lot of deep dives into documents that he secures under the Freedom of Information Act and just by being a good investigator. And Jeff Kay broke a story in December that is still not noted by most corporate media outlets or even the independent media in this country. And what he established through records released by the government is that there were actually two different torture programs. The better-known one involved Mitchell and Jessen and claimed to be based on reverse engineering. The SEER program, which is what we give to our troops to help them withstand torture. Well, Jeff and I both reject that idea that the waterboarding and other tactics that were used during the Bush administration were reverse engineered from SEER. More likely, they came out of the CIA vaults, the Kubark documents, our rich history of training the soldiers of South American dictators at the School of the Americas on how to torture people and disappear them. Here's an excerpt from my conversation with Dr. Jeff Kay.
And I don't believe that narrative, and I haven't for a long time. In fact, the more I think about it, Mitchell and Jessen were ops guys. Mitchell in particular. These are guys who went out and did ops. They would go out with special forces. They got training and interrogation techniques, which, by the way, also came out all this time. The Senate report. James Mitchell has no experience in interrogations, and yet the report reveals, and I've talked to some various people about this, and they had never heard of this. The report reveals a lot. This report is maybe one of the most important. The OMS released by this doctor gives us far greater insight into the internal workings of the CIA around torture than any document, I believe, that's ever been released thus far. So one of the things that it tells us reveals is that at psychology conferences, which happened annually for the Joint Personnel Recovery Agency, which was people who ran SEER being the military survival training, torture survival test that was given to many, many people in the military and the intelligence services and State Department. Secret agents and pilots and all sorts of things, that at these annual psychology conferences, there would be training done, or at least some of them, in interrogation. That the SEER psychologists and any other medical or psychological personnel were not just trained to help people who were released from POW, from incarceration by enemies of the United States, which is its stated purpose, but in fact had also been used to train people to participate in interrogations.
And I want to give you a second sound clip from my conversation with Jeff Kay, because what is really critical here is that the torture program, where we paid the psychologists Mitchell and Jessen some $80 million to devise these programs, it was human experimentation. And it is not out of line to invoke the ugly history of the Nazis and their Dr. Mengele, who conducted tests on those who were in the concentration camps and put them to death to see how they responded to various situations and viruses and things like that. And what we did is experiment on people to see what the most effective ways were to torture them and to get them to talk. Here's that second clip, Jeff Kay.
At the core of this program was a diabolical research program to look at, to study, in fact, torture, to do experiments about torture on individuals. It goes against the Nuremberg principles. It goes against law, international and domestic. And it's frightening to think that this is what's at the heart of our government.
I encourage you to listen to the full interview with Jeff Kay. It's available for subscribers today at peterbcollins.com. That's also at iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, and Stitcher. And in the show file for the interview podcast, you'll find links to Jeff Kay's detailed reports from his account at medium.com. Well, there's a bit of a political battle as a certain group of Republicans, just a handful in the Senate, appear to be ready to vote against Trump's emergency declaration to seize money from other accounts to pay for the border wall that Congress refused to fund. And one of these people is from Tennessee, and he reminds me of Bob Corker, the Republican senator who left the Senate at the end of last year, and his former colleague, Lamar Alexander, gave a speech yesterday where he sounds the notes that he opposes the power grab by the president. But like Bob Corker, we've seen this before. These wimpy Republicans who will say, I don't know, this is setting a bad precedent, and here's a quote from Alexander, he can build a wall and avoid a dangerous precedent, and I hope he'll do that. So that would change the voting situation if he would agree to do that. So he's begging the president to change the language and not to seize the money from funds that have been authorized by Congress for other purposes. But when push comes to shove, Lamar Alexander has shown himself to be a spineless guy. And it gives me momentary hope to hear people like him say that the emergency decree is unnecessary, unwise. It would turn a border crisis into a constitutional crisis about separation of powers. And Susan Collins of Maine. Oh, she's gone to great lengths in the Kavanaugh case, the confirmation hearings, and others to make us feel her pain. That, she just labors over these decisions so much. Now, she has said that she will vote to derail the emergency declaration, along with Tom Tillis of North Carolina and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. But when you have a president who doesn't use the bully pulpit, he just uses the bully part, I don't expect all of them to hold firm. I'd love to be surprised about that, but I don't expect it. Mexican officials, whether they will pay for the wall or not, we have a new administration there under Andrés Manuel López Obrador. AMLO is his acronym. And when he came into office, he was sounding the themes that he wouldn't collaborate with Trump and he was not going to be an enabler of Trump's draconian border policies. But Mexican authorities are blocking groups of migrants at border towns, refusing to allow them onto the international bridges so that they can apply for asylum in the United States. They're intercepting minors before they can reach American soil. They're helping to manage lists of asylum seekers on behalf of U.S. authorities to limit the number of people crossing the border. So it appears that Mexico is afraid of Trump. As the aforementioned Bob Corker used to say, don't poke the bear. Well, according to this report in the New York Times, AMLO does not want to jeopardize other aspects of the deeply interconnected relationship between the two countries. And so he is caving. AMLO has vastly reduced the number of Central American migrants that Mexico deports from its soil. But they support the migrant protection protocols, the Trump administration's policy to require asylum seekers to remain on the Mexican side of the border while they await a decision. And for those who are seeking asylum because they fear violence or death in their native countries, being just stopped in Mexico for an unknown period of time, does not necessarily give them the safety that they're looking for. And AMLO has been giving in to Trump's border demands and rarely saying a word against the American president. He gives a daily press briefing first thing in the morning, which is unusual, but he appears to just address the direct concerns of his domestic audience. And the posture of the central government is causing the states that border the United States, the Mexican states, to handle things inconsistently. So across from McAllen, Texas, in Reynosa, almost no one is allowed to cross the bridge to apply for asylum. And in Piedras Negras, officials rounded up hundreds of migrants who arrived in a caravan, kept them under tight watch in a shelter, and after a public outcry, that shelter was closed and many were bused to other cities and towns along the border. And so this is a messy situation, and I am disappointed to see Mexico become part of the mess. Over at the United Nations Security Council, Russia prevailed. They vetoed an American resolution yesterday that called for new elections and unhindered distribution of humanitarian, that's in air quotes, aid in Venezuela. China also opposed the American resolution. And what's really disgusting is the United States was represented by one Elliot Abrams, the special representative for Venezuela. He referred to the corrupt former Maduro regime. Dude, Maduro's still there. This idea of former is a fanciful spin on your part. He also urged a peaceful transition to democracy, like he did in El Salvador 30 or 40 years ago. And the reaction from Russia's ambassador to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia: Washington is obstinately seeking to escalate tensions, implement their scenarios for an unconstitutional change of government. And he later referenced the role of the U.S. in the overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya in 2011 as an example of why the stated humanitarian goals of the American officials cannot be trusted. If the United States were genuinely keen to help the people of Venezuela, they would operate through official channels, through any of the UN accredited agencies in that country. And he's right. That is not our goal. In discussions with the Taliban, Zalmay Khalilzad, who is now our special envoy for Afghanistan, I think for the third time now, he has laid out a plan for U.S. troops to exit Afghanistan within 5 years. Can you believe that? I mean, we have been there since 2001, 18 years. And we're now saying, even though Trump tweeted that we're going to get the hell out of there, well, the plan is that half of the 14,000 American troops currently there would be removed in coming months. That's a very vague timeline. And then the rest would be pulled out over a 5-year period. Oh, there is no end to perpetual war. And can we have a victory parade now? Yesterday, Trump asserted to Sean Hannity that the people we support in Syria have now completed a 100% takeover of the territory controlled by the Islamic State. Here's Trump's rambling comment. You kept hearing it was 90%, 92% the caliphate in Syria. Now it's 100% we just took over. Now it's 100% we just took over. 100% caliphate. That means the area of the land. We just have 100%. So that's good. Huh? Well, our friendly and falsely named Syrian Democratic Forces say it's 100% not true. The fighting continues. The battle is still going. There's no truth in that statement. And a CNN reporter said, well, I've been here for the last 28 days, and I can assure you that that is not the case. Now, as I've said, I support Trump's general instinct to get U.S. troops out of Syria. We have no basis to be there. And when you hear Democrats say that this is a hasty withdrawal, give me a break. And now Trump has been shamed into keeping 200 troops in southern Syria and 200 troops in northern Syria, and they're there for target practice for anybody who's got guns. A UN panel, the Human Rights Commission, or the Council, has done an investigation of the 189 Palestinians killed by Israeli gunfire on the Friday protests that began last spring. In a 25-page report, they say that Israeli security forces may have committed crimes against humanity. The Israeli security forces killed and maimed Palestinian demonstrators who did not pose an imminent threat of death or serious injury to others when they were shot, nor were they directly participating in hostilities. Less lethal alternatives remained available, and substantial defenses were in place, rendering the use of lethal force neither necessary nor proportionate, and therefore impermissible. And Israel said, Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. North of our border, there are problems in Ottawa. The Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who came on as a pretty boy, a guy who appeared liberal, and many people, I think, were seduced by their early awareness of Justin Trudeau. Well, he's in hot water because he went to bat for a construction company based in Montreal that was accused of criminal behavior. And he tried to intervene with the Justice Minister, and she rebuffed his efforts. For that, she was demoted to a different job, but that didn't stop her. Jody Wilson-Raybould was testifying before the House of Commons Justice Committee on Wednesday. She repeatedly contradicted and undermined Trudeau's assertions that neither he nor his staff acted improperly in trying to settle a criminal case against SNC Lavalin, a multinational construction and engineering company based in Montreal. Trudeau's up for re-election this fall. He's trying to tamp down this damage. And I would offer to send St. Bob Mueller up to investigate this, but I guess he hasn't finished his work here yet. And I've linked to an interesting op-ed from Leah McLaren, described as a Canadian journalist and novelist, who has a pretty clever line here. For Canadian liberals, or any of us who cling to outdated ideas such as good governance and liberal democratic values, it was like watching a unicorn get flattened by a lorry. And if you're not familiar with that term, a lorry is a British term for truck. Justin Trudeau, proud feminist defender of minority rights, advocate for transparency, inclusivity, and decency, prince of the one-arm push-up, was morally eviscerated over 4 hours of astonishing testimony by his own former Attorney General and Justice Minister, Jody Wilson-Raybould, a woman of great integrity. Now, she was demoted to the position of Veterans Affairs Minister in a cabinet shuffle earlier this year. Then reports emerged that she and her staff had been subjected to a sustained campaign by the PM's office over the handling of corruption charges against that company, which happens to be a large employer in Quebec. So, Pierre Trudeau really is in a pickle here, and we will watch this with some interest from south of his border. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Great people like Auntie Lundberg, Judy Holloway, Steve Wazensky, and Patrick Garay. They each kick in $5 a month, and you could do it too. All you have to do is visit my website at peterbcollins.com, click on the menu tab, click on Become a Subscriber. Then you're on the sign-up page, and it's easy to choose $5, $10, $20 a month. Our $50 annual subscription and a mailing address in the U.S. earns you a bonus book, and right now it's Justin Frank's, not Justin Trudeau, Justin Frank, the Washington psychiatrist, his new book, Trump on the Couch. It's a great read, and I'd love to send you a copy. And dovetailing with that, we have a new interview with Dr. Lance Dotis, who is from Harvard, I believe, and he is one of the people who helped write a book about Trump's mental issues. And this Harvard psychiatrist says that, Trump has a long history that proves his diagnosis, and it's pretty much an antisocial personality disorder is what he describes. You'll get a much richer analysis and not quite a diagnosis, but a psychological and psychiatric profile in Dr. Frank's book. Also from Canada, the Food and Drug Administration has issued a very unusual warning letter to a Canadian drug distributor, contending the company has sent unapproved and misbranded drugs to consumers in the United States. Now, I've only recently become aware that for about 6 months now, Trump has been occasionally tweeting that Europe and other countries like Canada are getting away with lower drug prices, and he wants to put a stop to that. Now, he seems to think that by raising drug prices in Europe and Canada and blocking Americans from accessing those discounted pharmaceuticals, that we're all going to feel better about paying top dollar to the drug industry in this country. It's just bizarre. And Grover Norquist and his, no taxes ever group, whatever it's called, they've been running radio commercials on Rush Limbaugh's show promoting this bizarre idea that it's Europe's fault that we're paying the highest prices in the world for drugs made in the United States. The governor of Washington and former Congressman, Jay Inslee, a Democrat, has announced he's running for president, and he will make climate change the centerpiece of his campaign. Quote, "We're the first generation to feel the sting of climate change, and we're the last that can do something about it." Now, I've met and interviewed Jay Inslee several times. I don't know the details of how he has served as governor of the great state of Washington, but I have a generally positive image of him, and I welcome him to the campaign. What is he, number 11? I don't think it's quite that high. I think we have 8 or 9 Democratic candidates who have formally announced so far. I would be curious to hear Governor Inslee's take on Amazon and Jeff Bezos. And today, in the New York Times, there's a full-page ad. As a whole range of people from corporate executives and Wall Street types and former cabinet members and members of Congress, labor union leaders, they are all taking a knee to Jeff Bezos, saying, please, 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 don't walk away from the Long Island City project. Don't listen to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Listen to us. We'll submit. We'll beg the billionaire. We'll give you any concession you want. Please, come and rape and pillage Long Island. Wow. It is truly ridiculous. Yesterday, in the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi regained control of her caucus. As we reported, on Wednesday, the first of 2 pieces of gun legislation related to background checks were passed by the House, but about 25 Democrats defected because Republicans threw out some procedural motions that basically threatened the moderate Democrats with attacks during the next election campaign. And these are red herrings. These are very frivolous amendments offered by the Republicans. One was to alert ICE if an undocumented immigrant tried to obtain a firearm. Now, I'm sorry. Anyone who is undocumented is not going to follow the system if they decide to get a gun. They're going to go buy a hot pistol on the corner. They know how this system works. And so this is one of those ridiculous, extreme Republican scenarios. And they sucked I believe it was 25 moderate Democrats into voting with them. It didn't affect the outcome of the bill, but the amendment was added to it. Then they tried another ambush on Thursday, surprising Democrats with a last-minute motion to exempt victims of domestic abuse from a 10-day waiting period to buy a gun. And the idea is, I was just beaten by my spouse, and I want to run out and buy a gun so I can kill them the next time they try to do that. And this is one of those emotional appeals that does work on some people. But Pelosi was able to limit the defections to only 2 in the vote on Tuesday. And then in a caucus, we're told that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez threatened the moderates who are voting with Republicans, saying that they are putting themselves on a list. Now, the implication is that it's a list of people who can be challenged by more progressive candidates at the next election. And it's pretty ballsy of AOC, who is the freshest of freshmen, to be asserting herself in this manner. And I have to say, I like it. We know that the Republicans use the phony claims of voter fraud to create cover for their massive schemes of election fraud, including purging of the voter rolls, suppressing votes in many different ways. And in Texas, a federal judge has temporarily stopped the Secretary of State, David Whitley, from any further purges to the Texas voter rolls. Now, Whitley says that he is looking for non-citizens who have registered to vote. He must believe Trump's claim that 3 million voted in California in 2016. But when they examined the list, they discovered that, there are very few people. Out of 100,000 registered voters whose citizenship was called into question, only about 80 so far have been found to be ineligible to vote, according to the judge. The evidence is shown in a hearing before this court that there is no widespread voter fraud. The challenge is how to ferret out the infinitesimal needles out of the haystack of 15 million Texas voters. I asked the question, why did it take the Michael Cohen hearing, the public one this week at the Oversight Committee, for members of Congress to decide they want to talk to Alan Weisselberg? Now, he carries the title of Chief Financial Officer at the Trump Organization. He's a bookkeeper and he writes the checks, whatever Trump tells him to do. And he's the guy who has written checks and knows where the money is, knows what is behind the transactions, knows the balance sheets that are inflated. And he's been on my radar for a long time now. But finally, they are going to demand that he appear before congressional committees. And finally today, we get the details from the New York Times that after just about everybody said Jared Kushner did not qualify for high-level security clearances, that all of those people were overruled by his father-in-law, and the Crown Prince last May was given full clearance. And at the time, John Kelly, who was the embattled chief of staff at the White House, he wrote an internal memo about how he had been ordered to give Kushner the top-secret clearance. Now, I wish that this were a new outrage. It is outrageous. Trump has lied about it. It's inappropriate. But it's business as usual here in America under Trump. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. By the way, I think I'm going skiing on Monday, so there may not be a podcast till Tuesday. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to